My name is Emily. I was 38 years old when the sound of the doorbell nearly stopped my heart. That chime was more than a simple visitor's call. It was a ghost tearing open 15 years of silence. I stood in the grand foyer of my Atherton estate, a mansion worth $15 million built from the ground up by my own determination. I had power, wealth, and prestige as the CEO of a tech empire. But in that moment, staring at the screen of my security camera, I felt like a small, abandoned child again. On the monitor, their faces appeared older, worn, but unmistakable. My parents, my brother, my sister, the same people who had cut me out of every holiday, every birthday, every family reunion. For 15 years, they had lived a life as though I had never existed. And now, there they were, waiting at my gate. I froze. My coffee cooled untouched on the marble counter. The silence of the mansion wrapped around me like ice. 1,000 memories surged, painful flashes of neglect, the constant reminders that I was the afterthought, the forgotten child. Success had built me walls of glass and steel, but those scars had never fully healed. Why now, why today? My first impulse was to ignore them, to let them stand outside until they gave up and left. But my hands trembled. That little girl inside me, the one who once begged for their approval, pressed me forward. I whispered to myself, not again. This time it will be on my terms. I gripped the edge of the counter, grounding myself in the present. The floor beneath me was solid stone, not the fragile carpet of my childhood home. The air smelled of roses from my garden, not the stale pizza from my brother's endless victory parties. I had built this life. I had earned every inch of it. Yet here they were. The family that had once slammed doors in my face now stood at my gate, daring to ask entry. I could already feel their intentions bleeding through the camera lens. Awe, desperation, calculations, and a question pounded inside me louder than the doorbell. What did they want? I remembered the vow I had made at 23 when they cast me aside after Grandma Eleanor's funeral. With nothing but $5,000 and a ruby ring, I promised myself I would build a life so great they would regret what they had done. And now, it seemed the moment of reckoning had arrived. I straightened my posture, smoothed my blouse, and inhaled sharply. This was no longer about their approval. This was about my freedom, my sovereignty. If they thought they could walk back into my life as if 15 years of cruelty could be erased by one visit, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. As the bell rang again, echoing through the marble hall, I whispered, "Let's finish this story once and for all." That day I did not just open the gate to my house. I opened the gate to everything I had buried inside me, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same. The moment stretched on as if the entire mansion was holding its breath. I stood there debating whether to shut the world out or to finally confront the people who had erased me from their lives. My finger hovered over the intercom button, my pulse drumming in my ears. Finally, I pressed it. "Can I help you?" My voice came out calm, almost cold, though my heart thundered. Static crackled before my mother's voice emerged. "Emily, it's Mom and Dad, and your brother and sister. We were hoping we could talk to you." Talk after 15 years of silence. After 15 years of ignoring birthdays, weddings, graduations, moments that should have included me. The irony nearly made me laugh. Still, curiosity pulled me forward. I pressed the gate release and watched them shuffle inside their eyes, darting across manicured lawns and polished stone. I raced upstairs, brushed my hair, and pulled on a clean blouse. Not because I cared what they thought, but because I wanted to look untouchable. I wanted them to see what I had become without them. When the doorbell rang again, I opened it with steady hands. There they were. My father stooped and gray. My mother, her pearls the same as always, though her face was worn by time. My brother heavier than I remembered, and my sister flawless as ever, dragging 2 children by the hand. "You look wonderful," my mother said, reaching out as if we had not lost a decade and a half. I stepped back, denying the hug. "This is unexpected." They filed in wide-eyed marveling at the marble floors, the sweeping staircase, the artwork they had no part in. My father cleared his throat. "We saw the article about your charity gala in the Wall Street Journal. We thought it might be time to reconnect. Of course, the Wall Street Journal, not because they missed me, not because regret gnawed at them, but because my name and face were now tied to billions of dollars in glittering headlines. I led them into the living room, gesturing toward the Italian leather sofas. My sister's children wandered toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, pressing their faces to the glass to glimpse the garden. Their innocence contrasted painfully with the calculation etched into the adults' expressions. "Coffee?" I asked. My mother perched at the edge of the couch. Coffee would be lovely. I escaped to the kitchen, my hands tightening around porcelain mugs. 15 years of fantasies about this exact moment, what I would say, how I would stand tall, how they would squirm beneath the weight of my success. And now it was real. But instead of triumph, I felt a storm brewing. When I returned, I placed the tray on the table, pouring coffee with deliberate calm. I sat down, letting the silence thicken until it felt like glass about to shatter. My brother finally spoke. "We've been following your career, reading about your success. We're proud of you." The words tasted bitter in my ears. Proud. Where was that pride when I graduated with honors? Where was it when I built a company from nothing? Where was it when I needed them? Now, only now, when I lived in a mansion and sat atop a billion-dollar empire, they suddenly felt pride. I leaned back, crossing my legs, eyes sharp as a blade. That's interesting, because in 15 years I haven't received so much as a birthday card. Not a single Christmas greeting, not one phone call. If you were proud, you kept it very well hidden. The silence that followed was heavy. My mother's eyes welled with tears. My father looked down at his hands. My sister adjusted her perfect hair, avoiding my gaze. And here is where I must pause to say something, not just to them, but to you. Yes, you watching this right now. Have you ever had someone who ignored you when you needed them most, only to reappear when you had something they wanted? If you know that feeling, drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. And if you're new here, subscribe and join this community, because we talk about the truths people try to bury, and I promise you, you won't feel alone here. Back in that room, the walls seemed to close in. My father cleared his throat again, and I braced myself. I knew it was coming. And when he finally said the words, the truth of why they had come, it landed exactly where I expected. "We didn't just come to reconnect," he said slowly. "We were hoping you might be able to help us." Help. The same people who threw me away when I had nothing now sat in my living room asking for something. My lips curved into a small, humorless smile. "Help," I repeated. "Of course. Let's hear it." That was the moment I realized this visit wasn't about family at all. It was about money, power, and survival. And I was about to show them just how much the tables had turned. I leaned back on the sofa, the weight of their presence pressing against me like a storm front. They had asked for help, but I wasn't ready to give them the satisfaction of answering yet. Instead, I let the silence hang heavy in the air, forcing them to squirm while I drifted backward in time. Because the truth of this moment didn't begin here in my mansion. It began decades earlier in a quiet suburb of Chicago, where the seeds of exclusion had been planted. I grew up in a colonial-style home with a white picket fence and a golden retriever named Buddy. On the surface, we looked like the perfect American family. My father worked as an engineer, my mother was a teacher, and the neighbors admired us. But the glossy picture cracked quickly once you stepped through our front door. I was the youngest of 3. My brother, 7 years older, was the golden boy. Straight A's, scholarships, football trophies. He was the star of every conversation. My sister, 5 years older, was the family beauty. Perfect blonde curls, captain of the debate team, a dazzling smile that made adults beam with pride. And then there was me, the afterthought. When I brought home a report card filled with straight A's, my mother barely glanced at it. "That's what we expect," she would say. No hugs, no special dinners, nothing. When my brother or sister achieved the same, the house filled with celebration, laughter, and expensive meals out. The double standard was so stark it carved itself into my memory like stone. I can still hear my mother's words echoing. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" At your age, she was playing Mozart. She compared me, relentlessly dismissing my efforts before they could even bloom. My father wasn't any better. He never missed a single football game. Of my brothers, not one. But when I qualified for the state science fair, he suddenly had an important meeting. Later, I found out he had rescheduled that meeting to attend my brother's practice game. Practice, not even a championship. That was the message. My achievements weren't worth his time. Have you ever lived in a house where you felt invisible, where every accomplishment was minimized, while your siblings were showered with praise? If you have, you know exactly how suffocating it is. And I want to hear from you. If this part of my story reminds you of your own, share it in the comments. Because silence only protects the people who cause the pain, and your story deserves to be heard. I remember one evening when I was 10. I had spent weeks preparing for my birthday, carefully hand-making invitations for my classmates. I woke up that morning filled with excitement, imagining cake laughter and the warmth of friends filling our house. But instead, my mother's voice shattered the dream. "Change of plans," she said. "Your brother has a championship game. We all need to be there to support him." I begged her not to cancel. My friends were arriving in 2 hours. My father's response still burns in my memory. "Don't be selfish. Family comes first. Family comes first," except it never applied to me. That day I sat in the bleachers for 3 hours forgotten, while everyone else cheered for my brother. No cake, no presents, no song. Just leftover pizza at the end of the night, eaten alone in my bedroom while tears stained the crust. From that point on, I understood my place in the family hierarchy. I was the shadow, the one they could sacrifice without hesitation. My sister was the cruelest. She borrowed my things and returned them broken, or didn't return them at all. She whispered with friends, silencing the moment I entered a room. When I protested, she painted me as dramatic. "Emily's just exaggerating again," she'd say, and my parents always believed her. My brother could have stepped in, but he didn't. He was too busy basking in his world of sports and popularity to notice my suffering. The only person who ever saw me was my grandmother Eleanor. She drove an hour each month to visit. With her, I baked cookies, read books, and felt valued. She looked me in the eye and said, "You have a special spark, Emily. One day the world will see it." Her belief was the only light in that house of shadows. Without her, I don't know if I would have survived the constant dismissal. But as much as Grandma tried, her love couldn't erase the truth. At home, I was invisible. At home, I was unwanted. That childhood, the hierarchy, the favoritism, the cruelty, it all shaped the woman sitting in that mansion 15 years later. And as my family shifted uncomfortably on the Italian leather sofa waiting for me to respond to their plea for help, I realized they had no idea that every cruel memory they created had built the steel in my spine. They wanted money, they wanted forgiveness. But before I gave them any answer, I needed to remind myself and them why I had become who I was. I can never forget my 10th birthday. It was the day the word family lost its meaning for me. I had worked so hard for that day, cutting colored paper into invitations, carefully writing the names of my classmates, handing them out with a shy but excited smile. For weeks, I dreamed of balloons in the living room, of friends, laughing around the cake, of finally being celebrated in my own home. But when I woke up that morning, my mother's face was set like stone. "Emily," she said while pouring coffee into her favorite mug, "there's been a change of plans. Your brother has a championship game today. We all need to be there to support him." At first I thought she was joking. I laughed nervously. "But Mom, my friends are coming in 2 hours. Her lips tightened. "We'll reschedule your party." The words hit harder than any slap. "Reschedule," I whispered, my voice trembling. My father looked up from his newspaper, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Don't be selfish. This is an important day for your brother. Family comes first." Family comes first. The phrase echoed like a curse, one that would haunt me for decades. Because what they really meant was Philip comes first, Sophia comes second, and Emily. Emily doesn't matter at all. I spent that morning making phone calls with shaking hands. I told each of my classmates the party was canceled. Their voices were confused, disappointed, but I mumbled excuses while choking back tears. When the last call ended, I sat staring at the pile of handmade invitations, crumpled and useless. 2 hours later, instead of candles and cake, I was sitting on cold bleachers in the middle of a stadium watching my parents cheer until their voices cracked. My mother waved her arms in the air. My father boasted to his colleagues about his star athlete. My sister laughed with her friends basking in the glow of shared pride. And me, I was invisible. Not one person turned to me that day and said happy birthday. Not one gift, not one song, nothing. When the game ended and my brother's team won, there was a celebration at a pizza place. I ate a cold slice in silence while my family toasted to him. Later that night, I went to bed without cake, without candles, without recognition that I even existed. That was the day I realized birthdays weren't for me. That was the day I learned I was disposable. And if you've ever had a moment like that, a moment when someone else's joy was considered more important than your worth, you know how deeply it cuts. Tell me, have you ever had a special day stolen from you? Share it in the comments, because stories like this aren't just mine, they're ours, and your voice matters here. That birthday was only one of many lessons in being overlooked. Each time my siblings achieved something, the world stopped to honor them. Each time I tried, I was told to sit quietly, to stop demanding attention. The phrase family comes first turned into a dagger. Because when my father said it, he meant family comes first, unless it's you. When my mother said it, she meant family comes first, unless it inconveniences us. Years later, sitting in my mansion, watching them sip coffee from porcelain cups I had chosen, that phrase came roaring back. They wanted me to believe we were family again, but I remembered every single time they had shown me I didn't count. That birthday taught me something else, though. It taught me not to wait for others to celebrate me. It taught me to find my own light, to build my own stage. Because if I didn't, I would always be sitting on the sidelines, invisible. So while they cheered for my brother, while they toasted to his victory, a seed was planted in me, a vow. One day I would not need their applause. One day I would build a life so undeniable they couldn't ignore me again. That vow carried me through nights of study, through loneliness, through rejection after rejection. And now it had carried me to this very room where the same people who forgot my birthday were asking me for millions of dollars. Family comes first, they said. Well, maybe it was time they learned what my definition of family really was. I looked at them across the table, remembering the little girl with crumpled invitations, and I thought, never again. Sophia was perhaps the sharpest thorn in my side during those years. While my parents overlooked me, she made sure I felt the sting of being unwanted every single day. Her cruelty wasn't loud or obvious, it was subtle, insidious, and perfectly designed so that no one else would notice. She would invite her friends over after school, and the moment I stepped into the room, their laughter would fade into whispers. Then the giggles would return as soon as I left. Sometimes she locked me out of the living room altogether, leaving me standing in the hallway while the sound of music and chatter floated past the door. Other times she would borrow my things, a favorite book, a sweater, a necklace, only to return them stained, torn, or sometimes never at all. And when I finally dared to complain, she always played the role of the angel. "Emily's just being dramatic again," she'd say, her voice dripping with innocence. And like clockwork, my parents believed her. My protest became proof of my overreaction, while Sophia's lies painted her as the perfect daughter. Have you ever had someone twist the truth so convincingly that others believed them, even when you were the one telling the truth? That's what it felt like. And I know many of you listening have lived through the same gaslighting. Tell me in the comments, how did you handle it? Did you fight back, or did you, like me, swallow the injustice just to survive? Philip, my older brother, was different. He wasn't cruel, he was indifferent. That indifference hurt almost as much as Sophia's schemes. He could have stepped in, he could have defended me, but he chose to live in his own world of sports and popularity, too busy enjoying his crown as the golden boy, to notice the little sister who sat crying behind closed doors. The one person who ever broke through the darkness of that house was my grandmother, Eleanor. She wasn't perfect, but she saw me. Every month she made the long drive to visit. She would sweep me into her arms, telling me how much she missed me, and for one weekend out of 4, I felt like I belonged somewhere. We baked cookies together, the smell of sugar and cinnamon filling her tiny kitchen. She brought me books because she noticed how much I loved to read. While my parents dismissed reading as antisocial, Grandma told me stories about brilliant minds who had changed the world. She came to my science fairs and sat in the front row of my school plays, clapping louder than anyone else. She once told me, "Emily, you have a spark inside you. One day the world will see what I see." Those words became my lifeline. In a house where I was invisible, Grandma Eleanor gave me the gift of being seen. Looking back now, I realized that she was planting seeds of resilience. She was teaching me that my worth didn't come from my parents' approval or from my siblings' comparisons. My worth came from within. Still, at the time, her love was a drop of water in a desert. And when she wasn't there, the desert swallowed me whole again. As I sat in my mansion years later, watching my family sip coffee and pretend to care, I thought of her. I thought of the way she had believed in me when no one else did. I thought of the ruby ring she left me, the ring that still gleamed on my finger as I stirred sugar into my cup. It was because of her that I survived Sophia's cruelty. It was because of her that I believed I could be more than what my family told me I was. And it was because of her that I was ready finally to confront them. But before I did, I looked at my niece and nephew Sophia's children playing near the window. They were innocent. They had no part in the past. And in that moment, I made a silent promise. I would never let them feel the way I felt growing up. What my family didn't know was that the strength they had tried to crush in me had already been forged into steel. And that steel was about to cut through every illusion they were trying to spin in my living room. The turning point came not in childhood, but in my early 20s, when the last illusion of belonging shattered completely. I had graduated from Stanford with honors, holding a degree in computer science with a focus on cybersecurity. For the first time, I thought I might finally earn my family's respect. But just as life seemed to open its doors, fate slammed one shut. It was the day of my grandmother Eleanor's funeral. The air was heavy with grief, though for me the grief was rawer than anyone else's. She had been the only one who truly saw me, the only one who whispered that I had a spark. And now she was gone. The service passed in a blur. My parents sat together with my brother and sister, a united front. I sat alone in the front row, clutching a photo of her. No one reached out. No one asked how I was holding up. The absence of their comfort burned worse than the loss itself. Later that afternoon, we all gathered in my parents' dining room for the reading of Grandma's will. Her lawyer adjusted his glasses and began. The house went to my mother, the car to my brother, the jewelry collection to my sister. None of that surprised me. Then came the unexpected words. To my beloved granddaughter Emily, the lawyer read, "I leave my ruby ring and the sum of $5,000. You were always special to me, and I know you will make me proud." I felt tears sting my eyes. That ring had been passed down through generations. It wasn't just jewelry, it was legacy history love. And for her to leave it to me meant more than anything money could buy. The room fell silent. My mother scoffed. $5,000 and her old ring, that's it. I stared at her stunned. She was dismissing the most heartfelt gift I'd ever received. My father's face flushed red. "This is outrageous," he snapped. Eleanor always favored Emily for some reason. For some reason. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. Maybe because she was the only one who ever showed me kindness, I said finally, letting years of resentment spill out. That was when it happened. My father slammed his hand on the table. "You want to talk about kindness? We took you in when no one else would. We gave you a home and education opportunities most kids could only dream of. And this is the gratitude we get." The air left my lungs. "Took me in," I whispered. My mother shot him a warning look, but it was too late. "You're not even our daughter," my father spat. "You were 2 years old when we adopted you after your mother died. Lisa Elaine's old college roommate had you out of wedlock. She was killed in a car accident. No father in the picture. No family who wanted you. So we took you in. Out of the goodness of our hearts." The room spun. Adopted. I wasn't theirs. Every moment of feeling out of place, every careless word, every slight, it all clicked in one crushing instant. I turned to my mother, silently begging her to deny it. Instead, she sighed. "We were going to tell you when you were older, but then it never seemed like the right time." 23 years, and it never seemed like the right time. My sister shrugged casually. Most of the family already knew. It wasn't really a secret. Not a secret to anyone but me. My stomach twisted as Philip muttered, "Why did Grandma leave the ring to her anyway? It should stay with blood family." Blood family. The phrase sliced through me. The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mrs. Eleanor specified that Emily should have it, because in her words, true family is about love, not blood. For once someone spoke the truth. But my father's fury grew. That old woman always undermined us. She filled Emily's head with nonsense. Made her think she was special when we were trying to make her realistic about her place in the world. My place, I stood trembling, but fierce. And what exactly is my place in this family? To be grateful every day that you took me in. To be reminded that I was never good enough. To be erased when it suited you. No one answered. My father just glared. My mother looked down. My siblings stayed silent. I felt the weight of 23 years crash down on me. And in that moment I knew. I didn't belong here. I never had. So I gathered my purse, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Fine, I'll go. But tell me one thing before I leave. Was any of it real? Did you ever love me at all?" The silence that followed was deafening. That was my answer. I walked out of that house, out of that family, and never looked back. And as I sat in my mansion years later, watching them sip coffee in awe, I thought of that day. The day I learned the truth. The day I was cast out. And I realized this visit was nothing but history repeating itself. When I left that house at 23, I carried only 2 things of real value, $5,000, and a ruby ring that once belonged to my grandmother. Everything else, my identity, my sense of belonging, my family, had been stripped away in a single afternoon. I landed in San Francisco with a suitcase, a heart full of grief, and a determination forged in fire. The city was breathtaking with its rolling hills, sea salt air, and the glow of opportunity. But for me, it was also terrifying. $5,000 doesn't stretch far in one of the most expensive cities in America. I had to be smart. I rented a tiny apartment in a rough neighborhood, splitting the space with 2 women I barely knew. My room was no bigger than a walk-in closet. A twin bed pressed against the wall, a wobbly desk squeezed into the corner, and a cracked window that whistled when the wind blew. It was nothing like the suburban house I had grown up in, but it was mine. And more importantly, it was freedom. By day, I worked as a technical support specialist at a small software company. The job was tedious, answering angry calls, troubleshooting basic errors, documenting endless tickets. My boss once told me during a review, "You're overqualified for this role. But I like your work ethic." Those words were both a compliment and a knife. I knew I didn't belong behind a phone line forever. At night, I lived a second life. I hunched over my old laptop, teaching myself new programming languages, diving deep into cybersecurity protocols, and participating in coding challenges online. I devoured free courses fueled by ramen noodles and instant coffee. Some nights I barely slept at all. But every hour spent coding was another brick in the foundation of the future I was building. I cut my own hair with dull scissors to save money. I bought clothes from thrift shops and walked miles instead of paying bus fare. My shoes wore thin, my fingers cramped from typing, but I refused to ask anyone for help, especially not them. I would rather starve than go crawling back to the people who had erased me. 6 months into this grueling cycle, I attended a free cybersecurity workshop at the public library. That's where I first met Professor Diana Chen. She was a respected name in the field, a woman whose lectures were quoted in industry journals. I sat in the back row, furiously taking notes. Afterward, my hands trembled as I gathered the courage to ask her a question about encryption protocols. Her eyes widened with surprise. "That's an insightful observation," she said. "Most people wouldn't even notice that detail. Are you working in the field?" I explained my background and current struggles, though I left out the part about my family. Something in her expression softened as she listened. "You have a good mind for this," she told me. "There's a hackathon at Berkeley next month. You should come." That single invitation changed my life. At the hackathon, I joined a team of strangers. Together, we identified a major vulnerability in a financial application, and our solution won third place. But the real prize was catching the attention of industry professionals and strengthening my bond with Diana. She became more than a mentor. She became the voice that reminded me of my grandmother. You see vulnerabilities others miss, she told me once, because you think differently. Don't let anyone convince you that's a weakness. Her encouragement was the fuel I needed. With her guidance, I began sketching out an entirely new way to approach online security. It was risky, untested, and far beyond what I could accomplish alone. But the vision burned inside me. I knew I needed investors. So I stepped into the brutal world of venture capital. I pitched to room after room, my hands sweating as I described behavioral authentication systems. 27 times I was rejected. Interesting concept, they'd say, but you don't have a track record. Each no echoed like my parents' voices telling me I wasn't enough. But unlike before, I refused to bow my head. To keep myself afloat, I picked up a second job bartending at a trendy lounge frequented by tech professionals. Ironically, while I poured drinks for entrepreneurs and investors, I was secretly dreaming of standing where they stood. And then one night, opportunity arrived in the form of a man named Travis. He tipped, generously, asked about my background, and kept returning week after week. Finally, he revealed himself as an angel investor. "I've been testing you," he admitted. "Most people talk big, but you actually know your stuff. Let me see your business plan." 2 weeks later, he wired me $200,000. It wasn't much compared to Silicon Valley giants, but it was enough. Enough to quit my dead-end job. Enough to rent a tiny office. Enough to turn a dream into something real. And so with nothing but grit, exhaustion, and a spark of belief, I took my first step toward building the empire that would one day make my family regret the day they cast me aside. The small office I rented with Travis's investment was nothing glamorous. It had peeling paint, flickering fluorescent lights, and secondhand furniture that wobbled when I leaned on it. But to me, it was a palace. For the first time, I wasn't just coding in a cramped bedroom. I was building something of my own. Those early days were brutal. I worked 16 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. I lived on takeout noodles, coffee, and pure stubbornness. There were nights when the code refused to work, when the system crashed, and I thought maybe I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But then, I would look at my grandmother's ruby ring glinting faintly under the harsh office lights, and remember her words, "You have a special spark." That ring was my anchor. Travis visited often. At first, I thought he was just checking in to protect his investment. But over time, I realized he was also testing me, pushing me to prove that his trust wasn't misplaced. He had a way of asking sharp questions that cut through the fluff, and forced me to clarify my vision. He didn't hand me easy encouragement. Instead, he gave me the gift of accountability. Then there was Diana. She became my lifeline. She invited me to conferences, introduced me to colleagues, and even sat across from me during late-night brainstorming sessions when I was stuck. She didn't treat me like a lost cause. She treated me like a peer. "Emily," she said once, "you don't just solve problems you see around corners. That's rare. Don't waste it." Her words made me bolder. With her guidance, I refined my prototype, a behavioral authentication system that studied user patterns rather than relying on passwords alone. It was unpolished, clunky even, but it worked. When Travis arranged my first demo with a small group of investors, my stomach twisted into knots. I stood in front of them with sweaty palms, explaining every detail, every flaw I had wrestled with, and every solution I had tested. At the end, one investor leaned back and said, "This isn't just interesting. This could be revolutionary." For the first time, I felt the shift. The world was finally seeing what my grandmother had seen years ago. Still, success didn't come instantly. Rejection lingered in the air even after the demo. Some investors said the idea was too risky. Others said I didn't have enough experience. But this time, I wasn't begging for their approval like I had begged for my family's. This time, I knew what I had was worth fighting for. And then came the turning point. After 8 grueling months, I signed a deal with a group of investors willing to fund further development. Their commitment allowed me to hire my first 3 employees. For the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. I can still remember the moment I handed them their contracts. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with pride. I was building a team, a vision, a future. The company needed a name. After sleepless nights of brainstorming, I chose Secure Now. Simple, direct, and a promise in itself. Secure Now wasn't just about protecting data. It was about protecting people. It was about giving them what I never had: safety, certainty, trust. Every line of code was a silent vow to the little girl who had been erased at her own birthday party. There were setbacks, of course, bugs that ate weeks of work, investors who second-guessed their commitment, sleepless nights when I wondered if I was chasing a dream that would collapse under its own weight. But I kept pushing, and slowly the world began to notice. Tech blogs published small blurbs about the innovative newcomer in cybersecurity. A Fortune 500 company reached out with interest in testing our system. Suddenly, doors that had always been locked to me were creaking open. One evening, Diana walked into our office. The place was buzzing: employees, coding wires tangled across desks, empty coffee cups scattered everywhere. She looked around, smiled, and said, "Emily, you've built something special here." Her words filled me with warmth I hadn't felt since my grandmother's kitchen. But it wasn't just the technology she was praising. It was the culture I was shaping, a culture of respect, of recognition. No one in my company would ever feel invisible. As I sat at my desk that night watching my small team laugh over takeout boxes, I realized something. I was creating the family I never had, not bound by blood, but by shared purpose. And in that moment, I knew Secure Now wasn't just a company. It was my redemption. The growth of Secure Now felt like watching a spark turn into a wildfire. What began in that shabby little office quickly caught the attention of people I had once thought untouchable. Our first commercial launch exceeded every expectation. Tech blogs wrote glowing reviews calling our behavioral authentication system a revolutionary step forward in data protection. Within 6 months, we had signed licensing agreements with 3 Fortune 500 companies. Suddenly, my name appeared in industry articles alongside giants I had admired from afar. The office expanded. We went from a cramped room with flickering lights to an entire floor in a downtown San Francisco building. My team grew from 3 to 15, then 30, and eventually passed 100 in only 2 years. Each hire was carefully chosen not just for technical skill, but for integrity and passion. I wasn't simply building a workforce. I was building a community where no one would feel invisible, where every achievement mattered. I made sure birthdays were celebrated no matter how small. Project milestones were marked with team dinners. Even quiet contributions were acknowledged publicly. In creating that culture, I was rewriting the rules of family, giving others what I had been denied. The press started calling me the Security Queen. Headlines read, "Young Woman Disrupts Cybersecurity Industry and How Emily Parker Built a Tech Empire from Nothing." I smiled when I read those words, but deep down I felt the echo of my grandmother's voice. She had been right. The world was finally seeing what she saw in me all along. Financial success followed quickly. Our second product, a secure communication platform, drew interest from government agencies and international corporations terrified of espionage. With each new contract, Secure Now's valuation climbed higher. Within 3 years, we crossed $100 million. But even as the numbers soared, I felt a hollowness at night. My condo overlooked the glittering bay filled with sleek furniture and cutting-edge gadgets. Yet when I came home after a day of victories, there was no one waiting. Success was loud in the office, but painfully quiet at home. That emptiness drove me to keep going, to build more, expand, faster, reach higher. By the 5th anniversary of Secure Now, we landed our biggest deal, yet a $200 million contract to overhaul the security infrastructure for a consortium of international banks. The day we signed, champagne flowed through the office, and employees cheered as I announced bonuses for everyone. But later that evening, when the party was over and the lights were dim, I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine, scrolling through social media. That's when I saw my sister's post. A photo of my family gathered at the lake house, all smiles around a bonfire. The caption read Annual Sullivan Tradition. So blessed to have everyone together. Everyone, except me. I closed the app, my chest tight. It wasn't the first time I had seen such reminders. But that night, something shifted. I realized I had been chasing their recognition even in silence, hoping one day they might regret excluding me. And yet even now they carried on as though I didn't exist. So I made a decision. If I couldn't have the family I was born into, I would create a life so rich, so meaningful, that their absence would no longer matter. I began searching for a permanent home, not just a place to sleep, but a sanctuary. Weeks later, I founded a sprawling estate in Atherton, the most exclusive neighborhood in Silicon Valley. The property stretched across 3 acres, with a main house, a guest house, and gardens that seemed endless. Price tag $15 million. My financial advisor asked if I was sure. It's a massive investment for one person. I looked him in the eye. It's not just a house, it's a statement. I poured months into renovations. I turned one wing into a library filled with thousands of books fulfilling my childhood dream. The dining room became a state-of-the-art office, and outside I built an English garden with winding paths and year-round blooms. In one quiet corner I placed a memorial bench for my grandmother, surrounded by her favorite flowers. The estate became more than walls and land. It became proof. Proof that I had risen not because of them, but in spite of them. And it was there in that very home that the past would come pounding at my gate. But before we step into that confrontation, let me ask you something. Have you ever worked so hard, built something so meaningful, only to feel a void that success couldn't fill? If you have, you're not alone. Subscribe now and stay with me, because what happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew about family. It was a quiet Sunday morning in Atherton, when the ghosts of my past reappeared. The sun had just begun to filter through the garden windows, casting golden light across the marble floor. I sat on the terrace in silk pajamas, sipping coffee, and watching hummingbirds dart between the feeders I had installed. It was peaceful, almost idyllic. For a brief moment, I thought I had finally found the serenity I had spent years chasing. Then the chime of my security system shattered the calm. Visitors at the gate. Annoyed, I tapped the tablet that displayed the camera feed. My coffee cup slipped from my fingers and shattered on the stone tiles when I saw them. Standing at the entrance, looking almost like strangers, and yet unmistakably familiar, were my parents, my brother and my sister. Sophia held the hands of 2 children, a boy and a girl, who stared wide-eyed at the grand estate. 15 years. 15 years of silence, rejection, and erasure. And now they were here standing before the fortress I had built to protect myself from them. My first instinct was to ignore them, to let them stand in the California sun until they wilted. But curiosity is a powerful force. What could possibly bring them here after all this time? What did they want? I pressed the intercom button, keeping my voice neutral. "Can I help you?" My mother's voice crackled through. "Emily, it's Mom and Dad, and Philip and Sophia. We were hoping we could talk." Talk. The word felt foreign coming from her. For a moment, I considered pressing the button to shut them out. But somewhere deep inside, that abandoned little girl stirred again. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the gate. I raced upstairs quickly, pulling on jeans and a blouse, brushing my hair and steadying my breathing. I didn't want them to think their arrival had rattled me. When the doorbell rang, I opened it with carefully measured calm. "Emily," my mother said warmly, reaching for a hug. "You look wonderful." I stepped back, dodging her arms. "This is unexpected." They shuffled inside, their eyes darting around the high ceilings and polished floors. Philip let out a low whistle. "This is quite a home." "Thank you," I replied, my voice cool. "Please have a seat." We entered the living room, where sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. The children wandered curiously, while the adults sat stiffly on Italian leather sofas, pretending to be at ease. "Coffee?" I asked. My mother perched delicately on the edge of the sofa. That would be lovely. I retreated to the kitchen, gripping the counter as waves of memories surged: birthdays, forgotten achievements, dismissed the cruel words at Grandma's will reading. For 15 years, I had rehearsed this moment in my mind. And now standing in my kitchen, I realized no rehearsal could prepare me for the reality. When I returned with a tray of coffee, the silence was heavy awkward. I placed the porcelain cups on the table deliberately, letting the quiet stretch. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "We saw the article about your charity gala in the Wall Street Journal. We thought it might be time to reconnect." Of course, not because they missed me, not because regret gnawed at them, but because they had seen my name in print tied to millions of dollars and powerful connections. I studied their faces, awe, desperation, calculation. I stirred sugar into my coffee slowly, then looked up. Reconnect after 15 years of silence. No birthday cards, no holiday greetings, no phone calls. And now, suddenly you're here. Why? They exchanged nervous glances. My brother tried a smile. "We've been following your career, reading about your success. We're proud of you." The words were ash in my ears. Proud. Where had that pride been when I graduated, when I struggled alone, when I built this empire from nothing but grit and spite? I set my cup down gently. Proud of me now, because the world knows my name, because you can attach yourselves to my success. Tell me, where was your pride 15 years ago? The silence that followed was deafening. And if you're listening to this right now, I need to ask you something. Have you ever had someone who ignored you until they realized you were worth something? Someone who only showed up once you no longer needed them? If you have, tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. Because stories like these are chains we break only when we speak them aloud. Back in that room, my father finally spoke. "Emily, we didn't just come to reconnect. We were hoping you could help us." There it was. The real reason, not love, not reconciliation, help. My lips curved into a humorless smile. "Help," I echoed. "Of course, let's hear it." "Art." And as their request unfolded, I felt the weight of 15 years lifting. Not because they were forgiven, but because I finally understood. They hadn't changed. And that meant I was free to stop wishing they would. My father hesitated before answering my challenge. He glanced at my mother, then at Philip, as if hoping one of them would speak first. Finally, he sighed and leaned forward, his voice low. "We've fallen on hard times. The family business collapsed last year. The economy hit us harder than we expected. And at my age, finding new work has been difficult." I watched him carefully, his shoulders slumped under the weight of years. But I also remembered how those same shoulders had squared in triumph every time my brother scored a touchdown, while he never once showed up to see me win an academic award. Philip shifted uncomfortably. "I lost my job in tech 6 months ago. I've been freelancing, but it's not enough. And with the divorce..." He trailed off, his voice heavy. Then Sophia spoke, her voice clipped but calculated. "Harold left me for his secretary. The settlement isn't final yet, but the lawyer bills are astronomical. I'm raising 2 children on my own." She glanced at me, her eyes softening slightly as if hoping the sight of her kids would tug at some maternal instinct. It was almost impressive the way they played their parts. My father with his weary dignity, Philip with his quiet defeat, Sophia with her subtle plea for sympathy. But I saw through it all. "So you came here," I said slowly, "because you want my help. Not because you missed me, not because you regret 15 years of silence, because you want money." My father winced but didn't deny it. "We were thinking, perhaps you could help us restart the family business. A loan of about $2 million would allow us to reestablish ourselves and it could be something the whole family is part of." The whole family. The words rang hollow in my ears. For 15 years, I hadn't been part of their family at all. I had been erased, forgotten, deleted from every holiday photo. And now, suddenly, I was family again, because I was rich. My mother jumped in, her tone eager. "You wouldn't have to do much. We know you're busy with your company. You could be a silent partner. But it would secure your niece and nephew's future." She gestured toward the children who were still exploring the room with innocent curiosity. I felt a surge of anger rise in me. Using the children as pawns, it was a move I should have expected. "We'd pay you back, of course," my father added quickly. "With interest." And perhaps you could consider allocating some shares of your company to a family trust. Keep it all in the family, so to speak. Shares of my company, the empire I had built from ramen dinners and sleepless nights. The company that was my lifeline, my vindication. They wanted a piece of it, something they had mocked, ignored, and abandoned me for when it was only a fragile dream. I studied them, my expression calm, though inside I was seething. My father's eyes narrowed, calculating the depth of my wealth. Sophia's gaze flitted around the room, almost appraising the value of each piece of art, each piece of furniture. My mother's tears glistened just enough to appear sincere, and yet for all their rehearsed desperation, there was no acknowledgement of the past, no apology for the years of neglect, no regret for the cruel truth revealed at Grandma's will reading, no remorse for the birthdays forgotten, the graduations ignored, the silence that stretched across 15 years. Just need, just hunger. I sat back, letting their words linger in the air like smoke. $2 million, shares of my company, rebuilding the family business. I repeated each phrase slowly, savoring the weight of them. Then I smiled faintly, a smile that never reached my eyes. I see. Oh. And in that moment, I knew exactly how I would respond. Not with rage, not with tears, but with something far more powerful. Because this time I held all the cards, and they were about to learn what it felt like to be on the other side of the table. I let the silence stretch until it grew almost unbearable. My family shifted in their seats, sipping nervously from porcelain cups they clearly weren't accustomed to. Finally, I rose with deliberate calm, smoothing the fabric of my blouse as if this were a board meeting, and I was about to deliver the final verdict. Please, I said, with practiced hospitality, make yourselves comfortable. The coffee is from a cooperative farm in Colombia I visited last year. The casual mention of international travel was not lost on them. My father's jaw tightened. Sophia's eyes flicked across the room again as if mentally tallying the value of every item in sight. I disappeared briefly into another room and returned carrying two things, a leather-bound album and my laptop. I set them on the coffee table with a soft thud that made them all flinch. Then I sat across from them, legs crossed, posture straight the way I sat when investors tested me. Before we discuss any financial arrangements, I began my tone. I think it's only fair we catch up on the last 15 years. After all, we're family, aren't we? Their nods came hesitantly, relief flickering across their faces. They thought I was opening the door to reconciliation. I opened the album. The first page revealed a printed screenshot of a Thanksgiving photo from social media. My parents' dining table glowed under warm lights crowded with relatives. The caption read, "Grateful for family today and always." "This was 3 months after you told me never to contact you again," I said conversationally as though commenting on the weather. I noticed everyone was there. Even cousin Jessica flew in from Denver. Their faces stiffened. I turned the page. Christmas the same year. A tree glimmering with ornaments, laughter frozen in pixels. Nothing better than having the whole family together. "That's a lovely tree, Mom," I said, tilting my head. "Did you use the ornaments I made in elementary school? Or did those get thrown out with my baby pictures?" One by one, I flipped through birthdays, graduations, weddings, baby showers, every milestone they had celebrated without me. Each page was proof of my erasure proof that their whole family never included me. Sophia's voice cracked. "Why do you have all these?" I looked at her with a small, sharp smile. "Know your enemy. Dad taught me that, remember, always know who you're dealing with." Her face flushed crimson. I closed the album gently, then opened my laptop. And then, of course, there were the emails. I scrolled to one from 12 years earlier and read aloud, my voice steady. "Emily, I must insist you cease any attempts to contact family members. Your mother was very upset by your Christmas card. We have moved on with our lives and expect you to respect our privacy. Walter Parker." I glanced up at my father. That was in response to the only card I sent after leaving. No accusations, just a simple holiday greeting, and this was your reply. He looked down, shame flickering, but never landing fully. And then there was this. I clicked another email, this one from Sophia to a friend accidentally copied to me. Ugh, saw another article about my sister, the tech genius. Mom was going on about it all day, as if being rich makes up for being such a freak growing up. Sophia's lips parted, her face pale. I didn't mean. Oh, I think you did. My voice sliced through hers. But it's fine. Your opinion of me stopped mattering a long time ago. I shut the laptop with a soft click and leaned forward, meeting each of their eyes in turn. My mother's tears glistened. My father's face was taut with anger. Philip stared at the floor, too cowardly to meet my gaze. Sophia looked like she'd swallowed glass. For 15 years, I said quietly, you lived as if I didn't exist. You celebrated holidays, you marked milestones, you supported each other through hardship. You were a family, just not mine. That was your choice. I stood walking slowly toward the window. Outside, the garden bloomed in riotous color. In the corner, I could see the bench dedicated to my grandmother, the only person who had truly loved me. And now you show up at my door. I continued asking for millions of dollars, asking for shares of the company I built without a single ounce of your help. Suddenly, the word family means something again. When I turned back, their faces were ashen. This was no longer about money. This was about truth. And I was finally strong enough to say it. They wanted me to forget, but I had remembered everything, and that was going to cost them. The silence after I closed the laptop was suffocating. My family sat frozen, the weight of my evidence pressing down harder than any accusation ever could. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue. My father's jaw clenched so tight I could see the vein in his temple. Sophia looked furious, caught between shame and denial. Philip. Well, Philip did what he always did. He looked at the floor, avoiding conflict. I walked back toward the sofa, my heels tapping against the marble like a judge's gavel. Let's be clear, I said, my voice calm, but cutting. I don't need a family that only remembers me when I'm rich. I don't need parents who erased me for 15 years. And I certainly don't need siblings who mocked me behind my back but come here asking for handouts. My father opened his mouth, but I raised a hand to stop him. No, you've had your turn. Now it's mine. I looked at the children, Jack and Emma. Their wide eyes darted between the adults' confusion etched across their innocent faces. And in that moment, my heart softened. They weren't guilty of their parents' sins. They didn't deserve to carry the weight of choices made long before they were born. I crouched slightly so I was eye level with them. Hi, I'm your Aunt Emily. We've never met before today, and that isn't your fault. But if you'd like, I'd like to know you better. The children glanced at their mother for reassurance. Sophia gave a stiff nod, her pride clearly bruised, but her maternal instinct overriding it. Straightening, I turned back to the adults. Here's what I'll do. I won't be giving you $2 million. I won't be signing over shares of my company to a family trust. What I will do is establish education funds for Jack and Emma. Enough for them to attend any college they choose. Enough to give them a future free from the mistakes of their parents. Sophia's eyes flickered relief mixed with resentment. We don't need your charity, she snapped. It's not charity, I cut in firmly. It's an investment. An investment in children who still have a chance to write their own stories. And the funds will be managed by my financial team, not by you. Every cent will go directly to their education. You won't touch a dime. I could feel my father's anger rising like a tide. He shot up from the sofa, his voice trembling. After everything we did for you, I met his fury with ice. What exactly did you do for me, Dad? Remind me. You fed me, clothed me, sent me to school. That's called parenting. That's the minimum required by law. And you made sure I knew every single day that I was an obligation, not a daughter. Don't stand there and act like you gave me the world. His face reddened, but I didn't let him speak. My mother rose slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Emily, please. We made mistakes. We're sorry. I tilted my head. Sorry that you hurt me, or sorry that I became successful without you, because those are two very different things. She had no answer. I glanced at the children again, softening my voice. This is my offer. Take it or leave it. I won't debate it. And if you refuse, then you leave here today with nothing. But the children will know it was your choice, not mine. I stood tall, signaling the conversation was over. My father muttered something under his breath, but no one moved. My family, who once held the power to make me feel small, now looked small themselves, shrunken by greed, exposed by truth. And you know what? For the first time in my life, I felt free. But before I close this part, I want to pause and ask you, have you ever drawn a line in the sand with people who hurt you, only to find your strength in saying no? If you've ever had to protect yourself by setting a boundary, share it below. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and stay, because the twists ahead will remind you why protecting your peace matters more than keeping toxic ties. The tension in the room grew unbearable. My words hung in the air like smoke after a fire, choking and undeniable. For the first time in my life, my family had no power over me. They sat there pale and silent, sipping the last drops of imported Colombian coffee from cups that suddenly looked too fine for their hands. I stood near the door, signaling the conversation was over. "That is my offer," I repeated, voice even but firm. "Education funds for the children, nothing more. My assistant will contact you with details. If you don't accept, then you leave here today with nothing. Either way, this discussion is finished." My father's face turned crimson. His voice shook with rage. "After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us. We gave you a home when no one else would." I turned to him, my voice like steel. "You didn't give me a home. You gave me 4 walls and constant reminders that I didn't belong. You did the bare minimum required by law and then made sure I knew I was a burden. You call that generosity, I call it neglect, dressed up as sacrifice." My mother rose, her tears flowing freely now. "Emily, please," she whispered. "We made mistakes. We were wrong. Can't we start over?" I studied her face. For a moment, I searched for sincerity, some spark of real regret. But all I saw was desperation, the kind that surfaces when options run out. "Are you sorry for what you did?" I asked quietly, "or sorry because I no longer need you? Because those are 2 very different things." Her lips trembled. She said nothing. I walked to the front door and pulled it open. Cool air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of roses from my garden. "It's time for you to leave," my father muttered under his breath, but he didn't argue further. Philip avoided my gaze as he shuffled toward the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. My mother followed, dabbing her eyes with the same tissue she'd been clutching since they arrived. Then Sophia lingered. She turned back, her expression softer than I had seen in decades. For a moment, the sharp edge of her pride seemed dulled. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I really am." The words hit me like a stone dropped into still water, rippling, unexpected, too little, and far too late. I nodded once, not out of reconciliation, but acknowledgement. "Take care of your children, Sophia," I replied. "They deserve better than what we had." She gave a faint nod before ushering her children out. The door closed behind them with a heavy finality. I leaned against the wood, my chest rising and falling as tears finally spilled free. But these weren't tears of sorrow. They weren't even tears of anger. They were tears of release. For the first time in my life, I had faced them on my terms. I hadn't been manipulated. I hadn't been silenced. I had spoken my truth, and they had no choice but to hear it. The mansion was quiet again. I wandered through the hallways, past the library I had built for myself, past the office where Secure Now had grown into a global powerhouse, until I reached the garden. The roses swayed in the breeze, petals glowing in the late afternoon sun. I sat on the memorial bench dedicated to my grandmother Eleanor. My fingers traced the ruby ring warm against my skin. I thought of her faith in me, when no one else had it, of the spark she said the world would one day see. And sitting there in the sanctuary I had created, I realized something: I no longer needed their approval. Their regret or lack of it no longer defined me. But as I dried my tears and looked toward the horizon, I also knew this wasn't the end. This confrontation had opened wounds I thought had healed, and it forced me to ask myself a question I had avoided for years. Could I ever truly be free if I kept defining myself by the family that abandoned me? The answer, I suspected, would require more than money or power. It would require something deeper, and that realization was the beginning of a new chapter I hadn't expected. The days after my family left felt like walking through an emotional storm that finally gave way to clear skies. For 15 years I had imagined their return. I had pictured shouting matches, tearful apologies, dramatic reconciliations. But reality was quieter, harsher. They hadn't come for me. They had come for my success. And once they were gone, I realized something I had been too afraid to admit before. Their approval had never been the prize. Their love had never been mine to win. What I truly needed was freedom from their absence, their cruelty, their shadow. It was in that clarity that the idea for the Eleanor Grace Foundation was born. Named after the one person who had truly believed in me, it would serve children in the foster care system, especially those adopted and then rejected or mistreated just as I had been. The mission was simple: provide them with not only financial assistance, but also mentorship, psychological support, and legal advocacy. I committed $50 million in initial funding. Some said it was excessive. To me, it was justice. Every cent was a tribute to the grandmother who had planted faith in me, and a rebellion against the family who had tried to crush it. During the foundation's planning stages, I met with Jordan, my old roommate from those early San Francisco days. She had become a literature professor at Stanford. Over coffee, I told her the truth about my past, the things I had hidden even from her back then. "I never knew," she said softly, tears in her eyes. "You always seemed so strong." "I was good at hiding it," I admitted. "I didn't want pity. I wanted to prove I could make it without anyone's help." Jordan shook her head. "It's not pity to let people care about you. It's human connection. You've been denying yourself that for too long." Her words lingered long after she left. She was right. I had built walls so high that no one could climb them, not even the people who truly wanted to. My foundation was about tearing down walls for others, but maybe it was time I learned to tear down my own. So I did something that terrified me more than any board meeting or investor pitch. I joined a support group for adults estranged from their families. For the first time, I sat in a circle of strangers and said aloud, "They abandoned me, and I am still learning how to live without them." The nods around the room were silent thunder. These were people who knew exactly what that pain felt like. One woman said, "Family isn't always blood. Family is who shows up when you need them most." Those words crystallized something inside me. My true family wasn't the people who had erased me. It was the people who had chosen to stand by me: Diana, who saw my potential when I was nobody; Travis, who believed in me when 27 others said no; my executive team, who had grown secure now into a global force with loyalty and passion; and the children my foundation would serve: children who would now know love, opportunity, and hope. 3 months later, I hosted a gathering at my estate. But this wasn't a gala filled with cameras and celebrities. This was different. I invited everyone who had become part of my chosen family: Diana and her children, Jordan Travis and his wife, my leadership team, even members of the support group. The garden bloomed with laughter, conversation, and the kind of warmth I had never known in childhood. That night I slipped away for a moment, sitting on my grandmother's memorial bench. The ruby ring caught the lantern light, glowing like her eyes once had, and I heard her voice in memory. "True family is about love, not blood." She had been right all along. So if you're listening to my story and you've ever felt the sting of rejection, I want you to hear me now. Your worth is not measured by those who failed to love you. You deserve belonging. You deserve peace. And you have the power to create a family of the heart, one that will cherish you exactly as you are. If this part of my journey resonates with you, don't stay silent. Share your story in the comments. Subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Because sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose for ourselves, and maybe, just maybe, your story will help someone else find theirs. The house was quiet after everyone left that night. I walked through the halls, the soft glow of lanterns still spilling through the windows, carrying echoes of laughter and voices that had finally filled my home with warmth. For years I had thought silence was strength, that shutting people out was the only way to survive. But in that moment, I realized something different. Silence had protected me, yes, but connection was what healed me. I paused at the garden bench, the one engraved with my grandmother Eleanor's name. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, their petals catching the moonlight. I touched the ruby ring, its surface warm against my skin, and I smiled through the tears that came unbidden. This ring wasn't just a reminder of loss anymore. It had become a symbol of love that endured even when blood ties failed me. My life had come full circle. From a child forgotten on her own birthday, to a woman erased from her family's photos, to the founder of a company and a foundation that now carried hope for countless others, I had created something bigger than revenge. I had created a legacy. And the truth is, our families do not always arrive by blood. Sometimes they are chosen. Sometimes they are built through trust, respect, and the courage to stand alone until the right people appear. So if you've been cast aside, if you've ever asked yourself whether you were enough, hear me clearly now. You are. You always were. And though the road may be lonely, it leads to places brighter than you can imagine. Family is not who abandons you. Family is who shows up. And that finally is where my story begins.